In 2011, Holly Bobo, pictured here, disappeared from her home in Darden, Tennessee. This strikes very close to home for me as it's not too far from where I live now. And I did a pretty long expose on this in 2019, and I did it in two parts. Those two parts will remain available on my channel if you want it in more digestible bits as part of a Holly Bobo playlist. But I thought I would merge it together into one long episode. If you are a fan of very long episodes, drive, need white noise, so you don't have to continuously change videos, I like to do those with you guys in mind. So with that being said, let's go back in time to 2019 Tracy, telling you about 2011's The Case of Holly Bobo, today on Keto and Crime.
Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everybody, welcome to Thought Crime, Keto and Crime, and the Keto Comic. Today I'm coming to you from Crescent Beach, Florida, where I am performing in nearby St. Augustine at Jackie Knight's Gypsies Comedy Club tonight at 8:30. If you're watching this immediately when it's released, I'll be there tonight, Friday, January 10th. If you're watching this in the future, check out my website, tracybarkleycomedy.com and .net for all my tour listings if you want to see me live. But I know you're here for the true crime, and I'm going to give it to you. Today we're talking about a case that comes from my home state of Tennessee, out in West Tennessee, one that was about 8 years in the making, and it's still not fully solved, even though there has been a conviction. It's one that has caused a lot of controversy and media coverage. It's the case of Holly Bobo. Let's get into it. All right. Holly Lynn Bobo. She was born October 12, 1990 in Darden, Tennessee, which is in the western half of Tennessee. In the east, you have the city of Knoxville, the Great Smoky Mountains. Middle Tennessee, you have Nashville is the major city. And then in western Tennessee, you're getting close to Memphis and the Arkansas line. Darden is in that area. So just to give you a geographical location, it's not all the way to the Arkansas line, but it is in the western half of Tennessee. It's west of Nashville, where I live. I live a little bit west of Nashville, like 20 minutes, but Darden is way west of Nashville. She was born, as I said, in Darden, Tennessee. Her parents were Dana Bobo. He was a tree surgeon. Her mom was Karen Bobo, a second grade teacher. She had one brother, Clint Bobo, and her cousin was Whitney Duncan. Whitney Duncan is a fairly successful country music singer. She came in fifth on the 5th season of Nashville Star, which was a reality show much like American Idol and The Voice that ran on in the early 2000s on the country music television. So she was a winner of that and has gone on to a lot of moderate success. She was in the remake of the movie Footloose. She has gone on to some pretty good success, and she was a first cousin of Holly Bobo. In fact, Holly and her grew up singing together in church. They were great friends. They attended the same elementary school. And Whitney said that she would actually help Holly practice her solos for church, that Holly was as devoted to music and singing as Whitney, although she decided to go a different route than Whitney. And for those of you watching on video, here at the top right hand, you have Clint and Holly, you have Whitney, and you have her dad Dana, her mom Karen, and again, brother Clint. All accounts a very well-liked family, loving family. Parents are still married to this day. I know that's pretty unusual in our time. They lived in a house that the father, Dana, actually built in Darden, Tennessee, in an unincorporated area outside the main city limits of Darden. And Karen actually taught at the local elementary school. In fact, it would come out later, she actually taught a few of the suspects in this case when they were in elementary school. So this is a very small town. Darden's a very small town. It has a lot of unincorporated area around it, which also the kids attend that school. Everybody, it's a community. Very much a country, a lot of hunting, a lot of blue-collar work takes place there. It's just your typical southern country small town. Holly grew up in this environment. They were very much churchgoers. Religion was very important to them. She always knew she wanted to help people. So as a result, she enrolled in the LPN program at Tennessee Technology Center in Parsons, and was from there planning to go on, after she completed that, was planning to take her NCLEX, become certified as a LPN, and then move on to another college to complete her RN, because she wanted to help people. Her and her mom were very close. In fact, Karen Bobo said that often they would finish each other's sentences, and this was from Holly's youth on. So incredibly close, a very incredibly close knit family here, this makes this even more sad. Let's fast forward to the date of the disappearance of Holly Bobo, April 13th, 2011. The timeline is as follows. Holly woke up to study for a nursing exam she had at the Tennessee Technology Center that day. She was sitting at the kitchen table when her mom and dad came down the stairs to go to work. They remember having a conversation with her, and her mom actually packed a lunch for Holly to take to school with her that day. And they left her sitting at the table when they left for work. Most people say before 7 a.m. At 7:30 a.m., and this is all taken from cell phone records, cell phone pings, text messages, 911 calls. So have been able to piece together this timeline. At 7:30 a.m., Holly answered a call from her steady boyfriend, Drew Scott. The two had recently become pledged. If you're familiar with what a promise ring is, it's kind of a ring where you give to somebody promising to ask them to marry you at a certain day. It's a Southern Baptist thing, but they were very serious. They were wanting to start their lives together. So she received a call from her boyfriend, Drew Scott, at 7:30 a.m. that day. He was hunting on her grandmother's property, hunting turkey on her grandmother's property. They had a very brief conversation. And again, she said goodbye to her mom, who was the last to leave for work. Her brother, Clint, was still asleep upstairs. 7:42 a.m., she made her last call from the cell phone in question. It was to a fellow nursing student about the exam they were going to have that day. And it was at some point after this last call, between 7:42 and 7:46 a.m., that a neighbor heard a scream coming from the Bobo residence. That neighbor, who was a young boy at home alone, called his mom and said, "Somebody's screaming at the Bobo residence. Sounds like they need help." The mother then turned around and called Karen Bobo at work. Karen Bobo took the call. She said thank you. She immediately called the house to try to find out what was going on. The phone rang several times. No one answered. She continuously tried to call. 7:50 a.m., Clint, who was still asleep upstairs, was awakened by the family dog barking. He heard voices coming from the area of the carport down where Holly's car was parked, and he immediately looked out the window to see what was going on because he heard a male voice and a female voice. He immediately recognized the female voice as being that of his sister, Holly. He said when he looked down into the carport, he could see Holly and a guy that he thought was her boyfriend, Drew Scott, kneeling, facing each other, holding hands, arguing. It sounded to him like they were arguing. At first he thought they were praying, but he thought that's weird. So upon closer looking out the window, he said that it appeared they were arguing, and he heard his sister say, "No, why?" in a very angry voice. And he at this point thought they were breaking up, so he didn't want to go down and disturb them. About this time, Karen did get through to Clint at the house, and he said that he told her that Holly must have decided to stay home from school and spend the day with Drew. Drew's outside, and the mother, Karen, immediately told him, I don't think that's Drew. But about that time, they hung up because Clint wanted to go investigate further. He went to do that. Karen then called 911 from the school where she was. Unfortunately, it rang into the neighboring county because the school was kind of in between two counties. So she immediately told the principal she had to leave. She jumped in her car and headed back home. When she got into the right county, she called 911 saying that something was going on at her house. She also, by that time, had again heard from Clint, who said that now Holly and the man were walking towards the woods, and it looked like Holly was walking of her own volition, and he could see that the guy was too tall to be Drew, because when he first told his mom she's with Drew, Karen Bobo actually said, Clint, that's not Drew. She said she had a terrible feeling that she knew that wasn't Drew because Drew was turkey hunting on the grandmother's property. She said, Clint, that's not Drew. I need you to get a gun and shoot him. And Clint, who, like I said, he was groggy, had just woken up, said, you want me to shoot Drew? And she said, Clint, that's not Drew. And about that time they hung up is when she got in the car and made the 911 call. Also got back in touch with Clint, who said, now Holly and this man are walking toward the woods. He's dressed in camouflage. I can see he's not Drew. He's way too tall and big to be Drew. And at that point, Karen lost it and told him to go get them. So Clint tried to call both Holly's cell phone and Drew's cell phone. No answer. Went straight to voicemail. He then grabbed his rifle and shot towards the woods to see if he could find them, but by that time they were gone. About this time, Karen made it back to the house. Prior to his mom arriving home, Clint had gone out to investigate. He couldn't find them. He went back into the carport where he saw blood near Holly's car. So he knew at that point something was up. About 8:10 a.m., police started arriving at the Bobo residence. They started at this point tracing her cell phone. They noticed that the phone pings were steadily moving away from her home, heading north. And it continued to ping until it got to an area near Interstate 40, and then it disappeared. It's like it vanished. It went offline at that point. Then around 8:30 to 9, the cell phone suddenly pinged back on. That wasn't unusual because there's a lot of wooded areas around there, and the trees could have blocked the signal for a time, and it started moving back toward the Bobo's residence in a southward trajectory, and then eventually did ping dead and never came back on, not far from the Bobo residence. So all around the Bobo house, there was a lot of commotion, a lot of local police, sheriffs, TBI, which is Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, all converged on the Bobo house. Dana Bobo, Holly's father, is quoted as having said to one of the lead TBI investigators, look, if you think myself, my wife, or Clint had anything to do with this, please just tell me, question me, ask me whatever questions you want, but please go out and do something. Basically, he was sick of the police just kind of milling around his place, not really doing anything except walking around, going a little bit in the woods, coming back. It didn't seem that they were really doing anything. To Dana Bobo, it seemed there was a lot of chaos and confusion, and no one really knew what to do. They did question Clint, as he was literally the last person to see Holly alive. He described the man he saw with her as being between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, about 200 pounds, having dark, long, straight hair that touched his collar. He was wearing camouflage and hunting garb, which was not unusual in the era. And he said when the guy stood up, he realized at that point it was not Drew, because Drew was a little bit shorter. And he said that the man had a deep, husky voice. In the years, and I don't mean that ironically, years passed. We're talking up to September 2014, when the Bobos finally got closure. But in between April 13th, 2011, when Holly Bobo disappeared, to September 2014. There was an ongoing search, ongoing investigation. They suspected Clint. They finally cleared Clint. They finally cleared the father. They finally cleared the mother. There was a whole lot of questioning of a whole lot of people in town and the surrounding areas. There was a lot of searches of the woods. And during that time, they started to piece some things together. They started to find some possessions of Holly's scattered in the woods and scattered in the area. The first thing they found was the SIM card for her cell phone, not far from the Bobo house in the woods, which specifically lined up with the time frame and location where the SIM went dead. So somebody had opened her cell phone and taken out the SIM card, rendering it useless. Then they found the lunchbox that her mother had packed her lunch in that day. They found a receipt with her name on it where she had purchased something the day before, and her ID card from her school, and the actual cell phone without the SIM card. All that was found in the wooded area around the Bobo residence. Then, on September 14th, some men searching for ginseng in the woods not far from the Bobo residence, just off of the I-40 overpass, found, we were talking a 20-mile radius around the Bobo residence, found what was later to identified to be as Holly Bobo's partial remains. The man that found it said that he saw a bucket that was turned upside down, very large. He did turn the bucket back right side up, but no one, including the police, has ever released what he found in that bucket. But just past the bucket, they found a skull, a shoulder blade, and some ribs. And the skull had a bullet wound to the back of the head, which exited through her left cheek. So and they also found some teeth, which they were able to do dental records and found out that it was indeed Holly Bobo, and that the cause of death was gunshot to the back of the head. Now, the thing that was so unusual about this case was the number of suspects. We're talking about 6 to 8 people that were questioned in relation to this case, but only 3 of them were ever indicted. 2 were convicted, and we're going to talk about that. But basically there was a lot of he said, she said. There wasn't a whole lot of DNA evidence to go on anywhere because it took them so long to find the remains. So really they were just going on speculation, what eyewitnesses may or may not have seen. One of the first people they looked at was Holly's brother, Clint. And yes, Clint may have been guilty of not going to his sister's aid as soon as he should. And I've heard a lot of people that have done this case in the true crime genre actually harp on Clint, saying he failed as a brother in every aspect. Well, sure, maybe he failed to actually go into the carport to see what was going on, but as I said, he had just woken up. I know when I just wake up, I'm not exactly in my full wits, and if I looked down and saw my sibling with somebody I thought was their significant other arguing, I wouldn't want to get involved. I would just be like, and walk away. I might listen because I think that's a tendency of people to be nosy, but I'm not going to go down there and get in their business, especially since I think that she knows him. Now, after my mom called and told me she doesn't think that's true, go shoot him, of course, then I'm going to get suspicious and may go down to investigate. So maybe from that point on, he was guilty of not grabbing a gun and investigating prior, but I don't think he had anything to do with his sister's abduction or murder. I think he was just asleep and it just happened in a very bad way. So I'm going to give Clint Bobo a little bit of leniency here, because a lot of people don't. They simply think that he's either involved or very, very negligent as a brother, but you have to put yourself into that person's shoes. But one person that I think should have been investigated a lot more than he was Terry Britt. And this is Terry, for those of you on video here. And to the further right is his wife, Janet. Now, he was a convicted rapist and predator in the area. He fit the description of the man that Clint Bobo saw. He was in the height range. He was definitely stocky in the weight range. And up until he was actually questioned by police, he had long shoulder-length hair. He did cut his hair, most people think, to change his appearance. And he had an alibi that just didn't hold water. Most TBI investigators that spoke to him really thought that they should have investigated him more. He also had a preference. Most of his victims were young, blonde women, which if you look at his wife here, I'm like, okay. But he had been seen by some friends of Holly Bobo staring at her in public. Just very creepy. And then you get to his alibi. When they asked him where exactly he was between 7 and 8 a.m. on April 13th, 2011, he told them that he and his wife had gone to a salvage yard to buy a bathtub and were going to install it at home. That his wife had stayed home from work to assist with that. His wife did back up his story, but when they called her employer, the employer verified that she had been at work from about 6:30 in the morning to about 11 a.m. when she received a call from Terry to come home. And then after later questioning, she admitted she had lied and that he did call her at work telling her to come home for some big news, the biggest news this county in Tennessee had ever seen. Just very weird. They also asked, do you have a receipt for the purchase of this bathtub? And he produced a handwritten receipt, but when they went to the salvage yard and actually questioned the owner of the salvage yard, they could not verify that the Brits had been there either that day or the days around and had never purchased a bathtub. Also, in later interrogations, Janet Britt revealed that she had assisted her husband in stalking young girls, and he also told a TBI agent, I didn't do it, but if I had done it, this is how I would have done it. And he literally laid out a step-by-step plan for abducting, raping, and killing a victim. Now, if that doesn't make your skin crawl, I don't know what will. Because that's just weird, that's heinous, that's downright evil. And I don't understand why this person wasn't investigated more. But he was cut loose for lack of real evidence. No DNA, nothing, no fingerprints, nothing. So it was really just circumstantial. And the Brits were cut loose, no charges ever filed. Then we get to the second round of suspects. First you had Terry Britt, cut loose from lack of evidence. Although he did testify at the trial of Zach Adams, who we're about to talk about, but still never charged. Zach and Dylan Adams were brothers. They were small-time criminals, drug dealers. Both had very low IQs. And I don't mean that to be mean or otherwise, but they had fairly low IQs. They weren't the brightest bulb in the pack, if you know what I mean. So they were just kind of simple guys. I'm not saying they were good guys, but they were simple. They first arrested Dylan, who you see here to the right on the bottom. Dylan was arrested for unrelated weapons charges, unauthorized, unlicensed weapons, and he was interrogated. During that interrogation, now one thing you have to remember, the interrogation tactics used in this case have long been under scrutiny and have received a lot of bad critique, that they were very accusatory, they were led. I don't know, I wasn't in the room when these guys were being interrogated, but during the interrogation on the unrelated weapons charges, somehow the subject of Holly Bobo came up, and he told the police that he had witnessed Holly Bobo at his brother Zach's home on April 13th, 2011, tied up in a green chair, crying. And that she was wearing a pink t-shirt. And that Jason Autry, another suspect that we'll talk about later, was standing a few feet away. Dylan said that his brother Zach told him that he had raped Bobo and videotaped it. Dylan later recanted this confession, saying that he had been coerced and basically forced by the police to give the confession, but it was still this confession that led to his arrest, the arrest of his brother Zach, pictured here at the top on the right for those of you on video, Jason Autry, who we're about to talk about, and Shane Austin. So there were 4 arrests in conjunction with the Holly Bobo disappearance. Even though Dylan did originally give that confession, Zach has always professed his 100% innocence. He didn't know Holly Bobo. He didn't touch Holly Bobo. So his arrest was by virtue of his brother's testimony that was later recanted. Jason Autry was also arrested. These arrests started around March of 2017 on into later 2017. And he was one of the second or third arrested. He was supposedly there when Dylan Adams saw Holly Bobo sitting in the green chair at his brother Zach's house, and was supposedly kind of a witness that had showed up to buy drugs from Zach Adams. Now remember, Zach and Dylan both dealt drugs, so it was nothing unusual for people to show up there looking for drugs. And Jason, in early 2017, agreed to testify against Zach if he could get leniency. And he did testify and confess that he himself was not involved in Holly Bobo's abduction, because of course, who's going to say that? But he did go to the Adams to buy drugs, and when he got there, he said he didn't witness Holly Bobo alive, as Dylan Adams said, but instead, when he got there, he witnessed a body wrapped in a blanket in the back of Zach Adams' truck, and that Dylan Adams, Zach Adams, and Shane Austin were there throwing stuff into a burn barrel that belonged to the person now wrapped in the back of the truck. He also told what has become to be known as the bridge story, which we will cover in the trial portion of this video, that led to what the police established as the timeline of Holly's murder. And finally, you had Shane Austin, who was named in both the stories by Dylan Adams and Autry. He was a friend of Zach Adams, also kind of a low IQ kind of person. He was very asocial. Think of an incel or a neckbeard. Lack of a better term, that would probably fit Shane Austin before that term became relevant. He was initially offered immunity to testify against everyone else, but then withdrew that. And basically he said that throughout the next few years, he said that he felt threatened by the police, that they were pressuring him to give a confession or they would charge him. And eventually he was found dead from a suicide, February 2015. When he had been arrested by Henderson County, Tennessee sheriffs on unrelated theft charges. So he killed himself, and his lawyer and his family have continued to this day. It was because of the bullying and the pressure put on him by law enforcement. As you'll recall last time, and I do apologize for being a little bit late, it took more research than I thought, so it took me an extra day to get this done. I do apologize. I am still near St. Augustine, Florida. We'll be going home later this week, but anyway, let's get back into it. As you recall from the last time, we went over the disappearance of Holly Bobo, which happened April 13th, 2011. We went through the timeline of that, which showed that she was awake, safe at home from approximately 4:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. when some circumstances came about that her brother was awakened by their barking dog. A neighbor heard a scream that he thought was coming from the Bobo residence, which led him to call his mom, who then reached out and called Karen Bobo, Holly's mother, who was a teacher at a local elementary school. She then called the house, spoke to Clint, the brother, who had just woken up, and he said he could hear Holly talking to what he thought was her boyfriend, Drew Scott, and it sounded like to him they were breaking up, so he didn't want to get involved. But then his mother informed him that Drew was hunting on the grandmother's property, their grandmother's property, that morning, and that was definitely not Drew to deal with it, get a gun and shoot him. And of course, Clint, being groggy, said, but he did promise to check it out. He hung up. He went downstairs. He found some drops of Holly's blood in the carport. He had his pistol with him. He then was able to see Holly walking toward the woods with somebody that he now recognizes was not Drew, was too tall, had long hair. None of those things fit Drew. And he was able to again talk to his mother and tell him what she saw. She told him to go try to find them, go after them, but to call 911, which both of them did. Karen Bobo had tried to call 911 from the school earlier, but unfortunately the school, because it was in a different county, rang into the wrong county, so she had to wait till she was en route home to make the call and have it placed into the correct county. By 8:30 that morning, the Bobo residence was crawling with police officers, TBI agents, sheriff's deputies, anybody you can imagine in law enforcement in a small unincorporated town like Darden, Tennessee. There wasn't a whole lot of investigating going on. They were just, seems to be setting up, blocking off the property, milling around, kind of going into the woods, but not really coming into the woods. So, in fact, Holly's father, Dana Bobo, got upset and basically told them, I don't care if you suspect my wife, my son, whoever, just ask us what we need to do and then go find my daughter. He was just sick of them not doing anything. For the next 90, from about 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., Holly's cell phone was seen tracking north away from the Bobo's residence. It disappeared for a while, then reappeared, nothing unusual with all the woods and the tree cover in Darden, Tennessee, and was tracking back closer to the Darden residence when it finally disappeared. Along the next few years, yes, you heard that right, years, till about September of 2014, little bits and pieces were beginning to unfold. They found Holly's lunchbox, her ID badge from school, some receipts. They finally found the SIM card and the cell phone from that day. And finally, in September of 2014, two men hunting for ginseng in the woods within a 20-mile radius of the Bobo residence found Holly's partial remains consisting of a shoulder blade, a skull, teeth, and some ribs. The skull had a bullet wound from the back of the head, which came out through the left cheek. So, a tragic end to a beautiful life. She was only 20 years old. From 2014 to where we're coming up to now in 2017, there were about 8 people that were considered suspects that were questioned. And of those, there were 4 that were actually arrested. And out of that, only 2 were ever charged. Terry Britt and Janet Britt, his wife, was a convicted sex offender living in the area who had an affinity for young blonde blue-eyed girls just like Holly. He also had no alibi and had a very sketchy description of how he would have carried out the kidnapping and murder of Holly Bobo that he told to TBI, but somehow he was cleared and never charged. Although there are a lot of TBI agents that swear it was probably him, but as I said, most of the evidence in this case, even the trial we're about to cover, was circumstantial. Also, the following were arrested: Dylan and Zach Adams. Dylan gave a confession in which he said that his brother Zach did kidnap and sexually assault Holly and then later on killed her. He later recanted that, saying that Confession was given under duress. You had Zach Adams, who has always said that he was 100% innocent of these charges. You had Shane Austin, somebody else who was offered immunity for a testimony he never gave. He was kind of harassed by police, so his family says, and he eventually committed suicide. Then you had Jason Autry, whose testimony, he was offered leniency, a complete, probably he served less than 5 years in prison for basically testifying against the Adams brothers, and it was his testimony that was paramount in the upcoming trial. So those are your suspects. Let's get into the trial. September 2017, Zach Adams was the first to go on trial. He pled 100% innocence in the case of Holly Bobo. He said he didn't know Holly, he didn't touch Holly, he's never touched Holly, and he's completely innocent of this. It was during this trial, and I'll insert a clip of it here.
But if this was the truth, we quickly learned it would be difficult to stomach.
The body didn't weigh very much.
Jason Autry is no stranger to courtrooms. He, like his one-time friend Zach Adams, is accused of killing, kidnapping, and raping Holly Bobo.
But I did not kidnap, I did not rape, and I did not kill Miss Bobo. And I did not. But I lied and said that I didn't have no details to it.
It was all so matter-of-fact today. Poetic in a sense, as he laid out how he met Zach Adams to buy meth the day Holly went missing.
And he said, I need you to help me bury this body.
In the back of a pickup truck, he told jurors, was Holly.
The body was laying in a multicolored farm blanket.
The plan, Autry testified, drive to the Tennessee River, gut the nursing student's body, and throw her in so she wouldn't float.
And I grabbed the upper torso of Miss Bobo. Zach come around, let the tailgate down. I brought the upper torso to the end of the tailgate.
But Holly wouldn't be dumped in the river that day. She was still alive.
I see the foot move, a movement, and a sound of distress that sound like, come out of her voice, come from the blanket.
Autry then told jurors that Zach went into his pickup truck and grabbed a gun.
Boom! The gun sounded, the gun went off.
One shot. If true, the testimony would be consistent with a medical examiner showing a bullet hole in Holly's skull. The most shocking
that Jason Autry's testimony was so important. And remember, this testimony was offered for almost 100% immunity in being charged in this case. And basically his testimony centered around what has come to be known as the bridge story. Basically it goes like this. He arrived at the home of Zach Adams to see a body wrapped in a blanket lying in the back of Zach Adams' white truck. That was another piece of circumstantial evidence that was used because Zach Adams drove a white truck. The neighbor who heard the scream that morning said that he saw a white truck drive away from the property. So, a body lying in there. He saw Zach, Dylan, and Shane throwing stuff into a burn barrel. He could only assume it was the possessions of the person wrapped in that blanket. Now, Jason admits he had gone over there to buy drugs, remember? Dylan, Zach, and Shane were small-time criminals. They were drug dealers, so it was nothing unusual for people to come to one of their homes looking for drugs. So, he saw this going on. Zach asked him for some assistance. He said, if you'll help me with this, I'll give you some drugs. So he got into the car with Zach, and they drove off toward the Tennessee River at an I-40 overpass, the Interstate I-40. And he basically, along the drive, told Jason, that's Holly Bobo back there. We got to get rid of the body. And so he was wanting to know what to do. He said, let's bury her. Well, Jason said that there were no pickaxes or shovels in the back of the truck. So how could they bury a body? So they decided to change course a little bit and drove toward the river, where it was Jason's idea to gut her like a deer, throw her into the Tennessee River, which was murky and dirty. And when she was hollowed out like that, she would fill up with water and sink to the bottom, and the turtles and fish would finish the job. Those were his exact words. They got there. They immediately took the body out to put it on the ground to begin preparing for what they were about to do, when Jason heard a moan come from the blanket and saw a foot move. So he realized, or he said at that point, Holly Bobo was still alive, and he told Zach to deal with it. Zach told him to go up to the head of the road to make sure no one was coming. Jason did that. He signaled, and he heard a single shotgun or single pistol shot ring out, indicating that Zach had finished off Holly, supposedly. Now, he said that with the echo that was in the holler, there in a holler is kind of like a tunnel through the woods there, and then you've got the overpass, which is concrete and steel, which is going to have an echo. He said it sounded, that one gunshot echoed at least 6 times, and so he really thought people around them had heard, even though there was no one around. So they immediately ran back, they put the body back in the truck, and they sped off. Zach dropped Jason off where he could walk back to his vehicle, and he said he would deal with it. And then, of course, we know about 3 years after that, Holly's decomposed body was found in the woods, not buried at all, just left there. The main narrative put forth at this trial by the prosecution was that the two Adams boys, Zach and Dylan, and Shane Austin, had gone to the Bobo residence to teach Clint Bobo, Holly's brother, the one that there was so much controversy about why he didn't act fast enough to save his sister, teach him how to make methamphetamine. And
Shocking part of the day, though, when Autry said Zach Adams went to Holly's house the day she was kidnapped to visit her brother.
The real reason that we were there was to show Clint how to manufacture meth. He said we got there early. She come outside screaming and raising hell.
They came here seeking the truth today. No one knew, though, that this is what we'd hear. Quite a day that still isn't over. You are looking live inside the courtroom right.
That's why they were on the Bobo residence that early. That was what was given by prosecution. Clint Bobo and Dana and Karen Bobo, the parents, adamantly deny this. It has never been proven, but that was what the prosecution alleged. And at that point, according to the testimony of Dylan Adams, who was the confession he gave and then later recanted, that she came out screaming and hollering when she figured out what her brother was up to, and they had to get rid of basically a risk to them all getting arrested, and that's why Clint did nothing. He knew his sister had to go because she was going to get them all arrested. So that was the very sinister narrative that was put forward. However, all of this was circumstantial. It was he said, she said. Remember, all of these men on trial had lower IQs. They were already small-time criminals in the community. And also, the judge on the case, and you can read up on him, was kind of weird in the way that he carried on at the trial. He even offered, now this jury had been selected from about 3 counties. The jury was supposed to be sequestered, meaning kept away from everyone. But during the trial, and I'll insert a clip of it here, the judge actually offered to take all of the jurors to a local football game to get them out of the hotel for a while. It was just very weird.
Was biased against the defendant.
You've got accusations by the defense that the judge was not being fair to the defendant, may have even thought that the defendant was guilty, may have even insinuated that the defendant was guilty.
And whether he got too familiar with the jurors.
Do we have any Hardin County Tiger football fans? Wow. We might see if we can get you folks out there in the presence of guard. You understand, you'll be isolated, but probably could put you on the visitor side. We play south side. If you want to go, there should be adequate place in this visitor side where we can put you without danger of exposure.
The judge is talking about
the way this trial went down, and that was what the Adams defense attorney contended that her clients could not get a fair trial and anywhere near Darden, Tennessee, because of their already reputations. But their reputations does not make them murderers. That's what she contended. And all of them have contended that they were innocent. And then the rest of the narrative was that after they took Holly off to dispose of her, they raped her in a local barn owned by Shane Austin's grandmother, and then they shot her and disposed of the body. And all of this was very circumstantial. There was no DNA evidence. There was really no eyewitnesses except for Clint seeing Holly walk into the woods and the neighbor hearing a scream. But yet they brought in all of these witnesses that kind of was a he said, she said type of thing, talking about how Clint was wanting to learn to make meth, and how Zach and Dylan had spoken about the murder of Holly Bobo and even threatened ex-girlfriends by saying you'll end up like Holly Bobo if you don't be quiet. Just a lot of different circumstantial evidence. And then the strange behavior of the judge at the trial. It was just weird. More circumstantial evidence was that 2 pieces of paper, receipts belonging to Holly, were found 75 feet from where Shane Austin lived. He and Zach Adams both drove white trucks, and the neighbor that had reported seeing a white truck leaving the Bobo residence that morning. One of the ex-girlfriends, Rebecca Earp, did testify that Shane said that he would tie me up just like he did Holly Bobo and no one would ever see me again. That was the evidence. And there were other people that were kind of anti-character witnesses that came forward that testified against the men, specifically Zach, who was on trial right now. And finally, a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver was found in the Tennessee River by a local man named Victor Dinsmore. The police contended that this was the murder weapon of Holly Bobo, and that the gun was actually traded for drugs between a couple of residents, and that it was found underwater in the Tennessee River, evidently to get rid of it. Again, no fingerprints, no DNA. There was no bullet ever recovered from the body because, again, it was decomposed. This entire trial was circumstantial. It was alleged by Zach Adams' defense attorney that this was just an effort of the town to make people feel safe again, that they wanted a conclusion to this trial, this case that had drug on for about 5 years, 6 years at this time. And they were so deadpan on getting a conviction that they created a case. That was her contention. And it worked, because the jury found Zach Adams guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated rape. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and to 25 years consecutive 25-year sentences. And he's in jail today. Dylan Adams, who, remember, eventually told a totally different story than what was presented at trial, but then recanted that, saying he did it under duress, entered an Alford plea. Which, if you don't know what an Alford plea is, it's basically where you agree to plead guilty to something, but then you maintain your innocence. It's very weird. I don't understand it, but he was allowed to that. He's not admitting guilt, but he is pleading guilty. That's what an Alford plea is. So he pled guilty and was sentenced to 15 years and also another 20 years for accessory, and he will be serving about 35 years of that sentence before he gets parole. Shane Austin had committed suicide, so there was no way he could be held accountable. Terry Britt was never charged. Jason Autry, the key witness for the prosecution, who was offered almost complete immunity in exchange for his testimony, was released with time already served. And there you have the case of Holly Bobo. Do I believe they have the right guy? I don't know, but I do think that it's more likely that perhaps Terry Britt, just like several TBI agents said, it's more likely he's the perpetrator, it's his MO, than these small-time drug dealers, because no one really believed the whole story about Clint Bobo wanting to sell drugs. That, again, that was just a story put forth by the prosecution. I believe this was rushed. People wanted a conviction. They wanted closure in this case, and they were given that. It was just a very weird trial from start to finish. And I do believe that perhaps an innocent man is sitting in jail and the real perpetrator is still out there. I don't know. Just my opinion. I don't know. But one thing I think we forget in all the hubbub about this trial, that a very young 20-year-old woman with her life ahead of her lost her life. And for those of you watching on video here is her grave marker. That's what we need to remember. That she's the real victim of this. Not these men, not Terry Britt, not the citizens of Darden, but her and her family. And I can only wish them the best. And that I hope that whatever happened in this case, it brings them the closure and the ability to move forward in life. And that's why I do these videos, to try to put forth some understanding and help people to remember that it's really the victims that we need to be feeling sorry for. Anyway, that's the conclusion of the Holly Bobo trial. I'll be back later this week with more true crime. Thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Keto Comic, out.